What is going on, everybody? We're breaking down UFC 277, Pena versus Nunes 2. And I'll be honest, I think it's a pretty weak card for pay-per-view standards. Would be a solid fight night card, but I think for a pay-per-view, I do think it's pretty weak. Probably the weakest card of the year on paper. That said, though, some of these weaker-looking cards on paper have been able to deliver, at least in terms of excitement and stuff. And honestly, I'm not trying to hate or anything. There are definitely some good matchups here, but I don't know if it's going to get a ton of fanfare. I guess the main event will maybe generate some intrigue just because I think people are going to tune in to see if that first fight was a fluke. I think the co-main event is solid, honestly. I think it's a really, really good fight. But as much as I do like the flyweight division and Brandon Moreno and Kakara France, I don't see how this is a quote-unquote title fight outside of them just, I guess, wanting 2 title fights for the card. Regardless, I do think it should be a really fun fight. I think there's a lot of other good fights on the card, too. I'm looking at Dober versus Alves. Michael Morales, pretty solid, interesting prospect. And Negumereanu versus Potieria, I think, has got potential to just be a very fun, sloppy fight. And then we also have another fun flyweight bout between Pantoja and Perez, assuming nobody pulls out, which does seem to be the theme for this card. I mean, just the canceled fights themselves would make, I think, a pretty solid fight night card. Anyways, again, I'm not complaining here. I'm kind of okay with this card being maybe a bit of a sacrificial lamb if it means the upcoming pay-per-view cards stay intact, because I think those cards are looking pretty stacked, especially 280. Very, very juicy card, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself here. We do have 13 fights to break down, supposedly. So without further ado, let's get right into it. And moving right along, we have Orion versus Blood Diamond. Koski's the minus 170 favorite. Blood Diamond's the plus 145 favorite. So this is a meme fight, honestly, just very low level. We have Koski, who I believe does have a wrestling base, but on the feet, he is very, very wild. He likes to load up big on his shots. He doesn't really set anything up. A lot of his punches are very telegraphed, and he's a very just big action fighter on the feet. So I feel that against half decent strikers, they should be able to see a lot of his strikes coming from a mile away. But with Koski defensively, all he really does is shell up also. So I think on the feet, Koski's just a very, very basic striker. However, he is pretty consistent with going to the wrestling. He's got decent timing on the level change. He will look to clinch up against the cage, and he does seem quite strong in there. But the issue is I don't think his cardio is any good, and he's really only beaten bums at the professional level. And on the other side, Blood Diamond is in a pretty similar situation, 3-1 as a pro. Just very green overall, and he's really only beaten bums either. He does have, I guess, a somewhat extensive kickboxing career outside of MMA, but I don't think he's some prolific kickboxer either. He does seem to have some good physical tools like his reach, but again, I don't think he's a very high-level kickboxer. Just from what I've seen, he does seem to be a bit of a showboater, honestly. He's throwing flashy strikes and they're spinning attacks, and he's also out there, he's taunting opponents, trying to egg them on. So really, just from what I've seen, I don't think he's anything special, but as far as this matchup goes, I do think he's still going to be the better striker, obviously. And against someone as basic as Koski, I do think that if this was largely a striking affair, we could see Blood Diamond get the victory here. But I see a very clear path here in the wrestling for Koski. I think that the takedown defense and defensive grappling can really be exploited here against Blood Diamond, who I feel like even a middling wrestler grappler like Koski should be able to hit takedowns and either find the submission ground and pound or just lay on top of Blood Diamond. I know he's coming off of a pretty embarrassing loss to Jeremiah Wells, and I do rate Jeremiah Wells much higher than Koski. I think Wells is a better striker. He's got more power on the feet, and he's a much better grappler than Koski. But I do think that Koski could still have similar success. Even if he isn't able to find the submission, I do think he could still hit takedowns, and I think he could still get just top control time against Blood Diamond, who I think is just very, very untested in terms of the takedown defense and the get-ups. And at 34 years old, I really doubt that Blood Diamond is making a ton of improvements to his takedown defense or get-ups. So the pick is going to be Koski here. I think he could either get it done inside the distance. I don't know how big of a grappling advantage he'll have. I don't know if he's going to posture up and just throw ground and pound in there to get Blood Diamond out of there. So I can potentially see an inside the distance or Koski winning inside the distance, but I can also just see him laying on top of Blood Diamond. So official pick, I'm going with Orion Koski by decision. I think we see a potential 3-round lay and pray performance. So give me Koski by decision. And moving along, we have Ihor Potieria versus Nikolai Negumereanu. And Potieria is the -170 favorite. Negumereanu's the +145 underdog. And we'll start with the favorite and the newcomer in Potieria first. So obviously a lot of red flags on this guy. He is going to be making his UFC debut. A lot of his wins have been early finishes, which are, I'd say, pretty big red flags. On top of that, they're against really, really low-level guys. I know he does have a nice, 20-2 looking record, but it is pretty heavily padded. If you take out the fights where it's against, debuting fighters with 0 wins, fighters who are 0-0, I think his record drops to 14-2, and then you take away some of the fights that are against opponents that are 1-6 and 1-9, just horrendous records. He ends up having a more reasonable looking 10-2 or 11-2 record, which we see a lot more from guys making their UFC debut. But I guess what I'm trying to get to here is I think there's just a lot of red flags on the Potieria side. He does look like a very athletic, very explosive, very aggressive striker in there. But there are some legit concerns as in regards to how he's going to look extended into fights, especially with how hard he throws early. You do have to wonder how he's going to look going into that second and third round, especially since he's going up against Negumereanu, who I really don't think is a great fighter by any means. But the one thing we do know about Negumereanu is the guy's got a block chin. He is someone who will continue to move forward for all 3 rounds, and he will kind of just get in your face and be there for all 3 rounds. So I do think that, on paper, he could give Potieria some troubles. I think that Homer Simpson sort of style could work against these debuting fighters, these fighters who are a bit green, who are kind of front-loaded in their win condition. And I think Negumereanu's got a lot of traits that could, give him success in this fight. So for those reasons, I would definitely recommend against the Potieria money line. But really, I don't think Negumereanu is any good either, though. The guy's just really plotty on the feet. I think he's kind of slow. And quite frankly, I think he should be 1-3 at the UFC level. I'd argue that he lost the Khmer fight. I'd argue that he lost the Nzechiku fight also. But he ended up somehow coming away with 2 split decision wins. But yeah, I really don't rate Negumereanu as a fighter in general. But I do think there's a path to victory here. I think if he is able to weather the early storm of Potieria, we could see him kind of just hang in the fight and maybe just outwork Potieria come that second and third round. Potieria, he is, I think, a pretty big, strong, athletic dude, and he does seem to pack a punch. So I think the early knockout may be live, even though Negumereanu has never been knocked out. I don't think he's really faced someone with the stopping power that Potieria possesses. But on the other hand, I think that another path to victory for Negumereanu is that maybe he does get hurt really badly in that first round, and we see Potieria kind of swarm him for the finish, but isn't able to get the finish, and we end up seeing Potieria just gassing out, and Negumereanu just being able to hit a comeback victory. So I think those are all on the table here. I think we get some pretty crazy outcomes when it comes to a lot of debuting fighters who are kind of front-loaded. So I think official pick, I might actually just go with Negumereanu here. I think that Potieria is still a bit untested. I would like to see him have a bit more success beyond that first round before I lay any sort of chalk on him. Don't know if I'll really have much action on this fight. I'm looking at maybe, if I'm betting the Potieria side, Potieria to win in round 1. But outside of that, I don't know if I'll have too much action. But official pick for this fight, I'll go with Negumereanu by decision or even split decision. The guy does somehow win these very hairy fights. So give me Negumereanu. And in the next fight, we have Jeon Kim versus Joselyne Edwards. And this is a pick'em fight, -110 both ways. And I do think it should be a pretty close affair between two strikers. So we'll start with Kim, who, she is a striker. She's got decent output, does like to counter a little bit more, but I have seen her kind of just trade in the pocket. Defensively, she's extremely hittable. She's got poor takedown defense and defensive grappling also. She's someone who can get stuck on her back. And Kim, she is coming off of what a lot of people think was a robbery, and I did think so too at the time, but upon rewatch, it wasn't a very lopsided affair, I don't think. I do still think Kim won that fight, but rewatching it, I don't think it was as egregious as something like Barber versus Maverick. But what was interesting about that fight was, all three judges actually saw the fight the same way. Like, all the rounds were scored consistently, right? It wasn't a split decision. It wasn't like one scored the first round for Kim and then the second and third for Cachoeira, and they all disagreed on which rounds were won. I think it was all scored rounds 1 and 3 for Cachoeira, which, if I were to play a devil's advocate here for a little bit, I think it might have been the power dynamic that really swayed the judges, because while Kim was kind of touching up Cachoeira, she was eating a lot of shots also, and Cachoeira was, I'd say, landing some of the bigger shots. So I can see why the judges may have scored those rounds in favor of Cachoeira. Not to say that I agree. And I think regardless of how you felt about it, I think the big takeaway here is that you just really can't trust Kim to win on optics, because one, she's just extremely hittable. So just no matter how much damage she's potentially dishing out, she's going to take just as much damage. And Kim, she is somewhat pillow-fisted. So for those reasons, her fights are never going to have like massive margins on them. So I feel that even against lower level girls, they're going to be pretty close, like, 50-50 or like 55-45 fights. And so for those reasons, I think you just can't really trust Kim to really convincingly win striking affairs. She's just going to give up a lot of significant strikes and just throw pitter-patter strikes. So I feel Kim is kind of unbettable at chalk. I think you'd need, plus money on Kim to really play her. But she's going up against Edwards, who is likely going to give her the fight she wants. And Edwards, she is a striker and is someone who I honestly thought would be a lot better just based off of her regional tape. But honestly, she's just had a very disappointing UFC run. She's got decent Muay Thai. Looks like someone who does hit moderately hard. She's an effective kicker. But she suffers from poor takedown defense, just horrendous ground game, and pretty shitty cardio also. Her two wins at the UFC level have been against Yeon and Ramona Pascual, two very unskilled fighters, two fighters who are probably going to get cut pretty soon here. And rewatching the Yeon fight, that was actually a much closer fight than I had remembered it being. And again, Yeon's not a good fighter whatsoever, and neither is Pascual, right? Pascual, who had no idea how to defend a kick. Anyways, this is going to be, I think, a pretty close affair just because, both fighters are going to get the fight they want. And when it comes to, I think, women's MMA striking, unless there's just a massive skill edge or a power edge on one end, it's hard to really discern who's going to be able to get the better of others in these exchanges. And it's honestly going to be really hard to determine what the judges are going to be scoring, right? So I do feel it's pretty 50-50 in that regard. But, kind of just breaking it down a little bit further here, I think that Edwards, she's probably the better kicker, the better fighter at distance. I think she does a better job of mixing it up on the feet, whereas with Kim, she is more so a headhunter, which I tend to typically favor over fighters who are, more leg kick centric, because I do think judges like head strikes a bit more. But again, Kim is a pitter-patter striker, and some of those shots may not even register to the judges. And with Kim, she will throw kicks, but isn't as consistent as someone like Edwards. But I guess the big issue with Kim is just that she doesn't really have any power. But she will throw volume, and she will move forward and get hit a lot too. So I can just see this being a very 50-50 fight. But official pick, I think I have to go with Kim here. I think she's had more UFC experience. I really don't trust the cardio of Edwards either, especially since she is going to be coming in short notice in this fight. On top of that, this is just how I feel about it, but with Edwards, I feel like she doesn't really react well to getting hit. I think she low-key could just be a little fragile also. Like, we did see Pascual land some nasty knees in the clinch against Edwards, and Edwards was visibly shaken up by them. And I'd say even in the Weanan fight, I feel like Weanan was landing some shots that Edwards didn't really respond well to. And I think that in terms of the optics of judges may pick up on that and see her kind of either reacting to him or kind of just like running away from him, which I don't think is a particularly great look. And just getting into the narrative side of things, I feel if it's a close enough fight and it goes to a decision, they might just give Kim the nod because of the robbery in her last fight, kind of as like a makeup call, but obviously not going to bank on that happening. But overall, I do think it's going to be a pretty close fight that I see Kim edging. So I'm going to go with Kim by decision. Pretty low confidence, though, but I'll just take her to win. I think a very close competitive decision. And moving right along, we have a short notice bout between Michael Morales and Adam Fugitt. Fugitt is going to be the one coming in short notice. We don't have any odds for this fight just yet. I think it got announced just a couple days ago. Still no odds, though, but I'll break it down anyways, and I'll give you, I guess, how I would line the fight. But we'll take a look at Morales first, who is, I think, going to be the much more explosive fighter. I think he's got a lot of raw tools. He's very quick. He's very athletic. But I do think that overall his game is still somewhat unpolished. I think that he can still get a little wild in striking exchanges, and I do think that his striking still does seem a little stiff, but the power is there. He still is very young, and I do think that he has shown improvements. He's making improvements fight to fight. He did show that on the Contender Series. He's able to mix in the wrestling and the grappling despite being just an early knockout guy. His cardio looked okay that fight also, so I think there's a lot of things to like about Morales, and I do think that overall he's got a lot of upside in his career. Again, still very young, and I do think that with the improvements he's already shown, I think that there's going to be a lot more room for improvement also. And he's going up against Fugitt, who is coming in short notice, like I said before. The guy, I think, is still a little hard to read in that, there's not a lot of footage on this guy. But also, he's fighting some pretty low-level guys, so it's kind of hard to see just how good or bad he is. But as far as what he brings to the table, he actually kind of reminds me a little bit of Burgos in that he's got a bit of a pressure-heavy boxing style on the feet. He's got those big rounded shoulders also, very long arms. He has shown he could mix in a bit of the wrestling also. Obviously, I'm not saying this guy's as good as Burgos, but he does remind me a little bit of him. But with Fugitt, there are a lot of concerns that I have with him. From what I have seen, I do think he's still somewhat unpolished also, still a bit green. I think it was in his fight against Solomon Renfro. He just went out there and started spamming head kicks. I think he went to the well like 7 or 8 times with the body and head kick. And he did get away with it in that fight, but I do feel that that's just very dangerous against, I'd say, better opponents. They're going to be able to capitalize on it and probably put him out, which brings me to my next point. I think that the chin of Fugitt's a little questionable. He has been knocked out before, and I do remember in one of his regional fights, some guy did drop him. He showed really quick recoverability, but going into this fight, I do think that's pretty concerning because he's going up against a very quick, very sharp, and very heavy hitter in Morales, and I do think that Morales is going to be very alive for that early knockout. I think that Morales could probably land something clean and put him out in that first round. That said, though, I don't want to completely write Fugitt out here. I don't think he's a terrible fighter, but it's really hard to say because very limited footage in competition. But from what I have seen, I do think that Morales is going to be the much better athlete in there. He's shown much more explosive striking, and I do think he's much quicker also. But Fugitt, he does have pretty, I guess, awkward striking, which could give Morales some troubles. And Fugitt, he has shown that he will pretty aggressively attack the grappling, right? I think in one of his regional fights, he just looked to cage push aggressively early. He tried to get the fight to the mat, and I could see that potentially happening here. Even though Fugitt, he didn't have a ton of success with it, it's something he could do to maybe stall the fight out and maybe slow down Morales a little bit. That said, though, I think Morales could probably hit takedowns also. Overall, I do still have to favor Morales here, but just given the unknowns on both guys, I wouldn't be willing to lay too much here. But I guess as far as how I would line the fight, I think Morales is probably going to have to be like a minus 200, minus 250 favorite, which I think is pretty fair. I don't want to completely write Fugitt off here, but I do think that Morales likely has him covered in most areas, on top of the fact that Fugitt, he's actually going to be the one coming in short notice. So official pick, I'm going to go with Morales. Morales by round 1 knockout. Not sure if I'll put any bets on this fight. We'll have to wait for the lines to open up, but official pick, I'll go with Morales by round 1 knockout. And moving along, we have Drakkar Klose versus Rafa García, and Klose is the minus 205 favorite. García is the plus 175 underdog. And we'll start with the sizable favorite and veteran in Klose. So with Klose, he's a pretty solid, well-rounded fighter. He's got decent power. He's got some very heavy leg kicks. He likes to work in the clinch. Lots of cage pushing from him, just grinding on opponents. He can hit takedowns as well. But overall, I'm just not a big fan of his style, just because the guy's typically very low volume. He's just a very grindy sort of fighter that fights very close in a lot of his fights. But at the end of the day, he does get it done against UFC caliber guys, right? Guys like Giagos and Venata and Bobby Green and DeCasey. So all decent guys, and he is able to win against them. So his style, while it is kind of boring, it is pretty effective, and it gets the job done. And on the other side, we have García, who I think fights pretty similarly. García is just a very grindy, very gritty sort of fighter. He's someone who will move forward and throw volume, and he will look to spam takedowns in there. However, I think the cardio situation for García is a little weird in that, I don't think he's got horrendous cardio, but his body language just really does not look good past that first round. He's typically huffing and puffing in there, and a lot of his movement looks very labored, but somehow he is able to fight through it. He is coming off of a performance against Ronson where he was able to break Ronson in that second round. So, while I don't think he's got the best cardio, he has shown that he can fight through it pretty damn well. However, it was against some pretty low-level guys, and I don't know, I'm not all that impressed with him going life and death with someone like Natan Levy, so not a particularly great look there. And then, of course, he did get just outpaced by Gritzmacher also. And he is going up against someone in Klose who has shown, pretty good cardio over the course of 3 rounds. Klose has also shown that he can execute that sort of game plan against higher level guys, whereas García, he's doing it against the Natan Levies, the Ronsons, who I did bet Ronson against him, but Ronson did not look good that fight. And something to note is that Ronson, he is getting a bit older, coming off of, I think, a PED suspension, moving down a weight class also. So I feel all these things may have affected him coming into this fight. So I just think that the overall level of competition is in favor of Klose by a pretty significant margin. So I guess what it comes down to is I think that Klose should be able to implement his game plan. I think that he'll have the cardio to match García, and so I do think that Klose will be able to likely just eke out a decision here. So I do like the Klose side. However, the fact that Klose tends to fight very close, I guess, in a lot of his fights, does leave some very thin margins, but I do think he should get it done. I think he's just the better striker on the feet. I think he's going to likely be able to get the better of García in the clinch exchanges, in the grappling exchanges. But there are some slight concerns that I have on the Klose side. He is getting a little up there in age, and I believe he is coming off of an injury. He did look good against Brendan Jenkins in his most recent fight, but I don't know if you could really take too much from it. Jenkins is a punching bag, someone who is not UFC caliber, and Klose just went in there and completely just beat him up. So, I don't know if you could take that too much into consideration here. I think Garcia is going to put up a lot more of a fight, but I do think Klose should get it done here by unanimous decision. And I do like this fight to go the distance. Klose historically has been a decisionator. He did get a finish in his last fight, but again, it was against a punching bag in Jenkins, who is not UFC caliber. And on the other side of things, we have García, who I think is a decisionator also, not someone with a ton of power or anything. And both guys have shown really good durability, so I don't think we see a finish here. It'll likely just be a very grindy, very gritty sort of decision where we see a lot of cage pushing, probably a bit of grappling, maybe a little striking. So I can see this being kind of close, but I do think that Klose ends up edging it. So give me Klose by decision. And moving along, we have a short notice fight between Don'Tale Mayes and Hamdy Abdelwahab. And Abdelwahab's the minus 125 favorite. Mayes is plus 105 underdog. And like I was saying, this is a short notice fight. Abdelwahab is stepping in short notice. Mayes originally slated to go up against Justin Tafa. Obviously, Tafa wasn't able to make it, so Abdelwahab is coming in short notice for this fight. About a week and a half notice here. And with Abdelwahab, he is a wrestler. I believe he was a Greco-Roman Olympic wrestler. So the wrestling is going to be a big part of his game here, and he does go to it pretty consistently, at least in all of the regional footage that I've seen. His striking does still seem a bit rudimentary, or really just looking to wing big hooks in there, close the distance, and get in on opponents. However, I don't really rate his top game all that much, and it does look like he's kind of beating up on a lot of lower level guys regionally. And while I do feel that he's got a pretty solid base coming into MMA, I feel like his overall game is still pretty one-dimensional, and I just haven't really been all that impressed with what I've seen. His cardio seemed okay, I guess. It's kind of hard to tell because he's basically hitting takedowns at will against a lot of these lower-level guys, and they don't really seem to know what to do once they're on their back. So it's hard to say how he's going to look against, I guess, someone with slightly better takedown defense and get-ups. But I do have my concerns going into this fight, especially since it is a short notice fight for Abdelwahab. But on the other side of things, we have Mayes, who is coming off of a full camp, and Mayes, who I think is a somewhat well-rounded heavyweight. His striking is okay. He moves well. He actually feints and throws kicks. Does seem to know what to do in the clinch. And most recently, we are seeing him come off of a pretty wrestle-heavy performance over Parisian. Granted, it was a one-fight sample size, but it is good to see Mayes, who is a somewhat young heavyweight, start to add some other wrinkles to his game. But by and large, I do feel that Mayes is going to be the much more well-rounded fighter here. He's also been in there with much better guys. I will say this about Mayes, though, is his takedown defense does seem pretty bad. Same with his get-ups and submission defense. Him getting submitted by Cyril Gane's not a particularly good look, in my opinion. I know Cyril has pulled off a few submission wins at the UFC level, but the way in which I guess he was taken down and how quickly Cyril was able to just snatch up that heel hook was, I think, a little concerning. On top of that, I feel that Mayes might not be the most physical heavyweight in there. He definitely has a big frame and does seem like he might be quite strong, but he does get bullied around a decent amount in the clinch. I feel like his balance isn't great, so I think that Abdelwahab is definitely live to hit takedowns in this fight, and stylistically, I do feel this is kind of favorable for Abdelwahab. Sorry. Because I do feel that Mayes, his takedown defense is pretty poor and his get-ups is pretty poor. But the issue that I do have with this one is that Abdelwahab is coming in short notice, and I do have some serious question marks as to how he's going to look going into that second and third round. I feel that Abdelwahab, he's probably going to come in round one, look pretty good, probably hit some takedowns, get top control time. But going into that second and third round, I think his cardio is going to take a hit, especially if he is wrestling early. And if that is the case, I just kind of have a hard time seeing him have sustained wrestling success and rack up control time in the second and third round. So for those reasons, I'm going to side with Mayes here. I really don't think Mayes should be the underdog, even though stylistically it is somewhat unfavorable for him. It's just on the feet, I do favor Mayes by a decent margin. And I also favor his cardio going into the second and third round also. And really, I think Abdelwahab's most likely path to victory is going to be getting enough top control time over the course of 2 rounds to win a decision here. I don't know if he's going to be able to finish Mayes like he has against some of these lower level regional guys. So I think his most realistic path here is to maybe rack up 7-8 minutes of control time over the course of 2 rounds, which I think he could probably get maybe one good round of top control time, but I think beyond that, I think he's going to struggle hitting takedowns and maintaining control. So I'm going to go with Mayes. Likely by decision, maybe a late finish, depending on how tired Abdelwahab gets. And something else I wanted to add real quick is Abdelwahab, he is a good offensive wrestler, but we haven't really seen how he looks on bottom. And I feel that if Mays is somehow initiating takedowns, or if they're in the clinch or something and he's able to hit a trip, we could see Mays get a ton of top control time, because with a lot of these wrestlers that come in, they're still really green. While they do have good takedowns and they are good on top, I feel overall their bottom game is probably not going to be as polished. Same with their striking. So I'm going to go with Mays here. He's just the way more well-rounded MMA fighter. He's the one coming in on a full camp, and he's just going to be the guy with, I'd say, more the UFC experience. So for those reasons, I think Mays is the side. I really don't think he should be the underdog here. I think he should, at worst, just be a slight favorite. So I like Mays in the spot to get it done, either by decision or maybe a late finish. So give me Mays. Official pick. I guess I'll go with decision. And in the next fight, we have Drew Dober versus Rafael Alves. And Dober's the minus 235 favorite. Alves is the plus 200 underdog. And should be a pretty fun fight, honestly. We have Alves, who is just a very dynamic fighter, someone who's extremely explosive on the feet, very big power in his hands, very heavy leg kicks. He likes to go in there just throwing big, powerful hooks. He's going to look to throw spinning attacks also. And he has shown a pretty dangerous grappling game also. He's got a very dangerous guillotine. I have seen him actually hit some nice trips and reversals on the mat. He was in a pretty crazy scramble against Ismagulov where looked like he did a flare or something, right? Very creative scrambling on his part. But Alves, while he is someone who's dangerous and is capable of finishing on the mat and on the feet, there are some concerns on his side. So, those big explosive actions are going to drain on the cardio, and he is someone who will slow down as the fight progresses. And Alves, he's someone who hasn't shown particularly great durability either. He has been finished on numerous occasions on the regionals. So definitely concerns going into this fight, especially since Alves is going to be going up against Dober, who historically has shown insane durability, insane recoverability. And on top of that, Dober, he's just a very skilled striker. He's got good footwork. Overall, just a really good kicking game. He can throw in combination. He's got decent counterpunching also. He can also fight moving backwards. He does do a better job when he's pressuring, but I just think that on the feet, he's going to be the way more technical fighter, the way more seasoned striker also. But I'd say the one major hole in Dober's game is going to be his takedown defense and his defensive grappling. He's routinely lost to guys that have been able to take him down and either control him or just submit him there. And historically, he's kind of just struggled against guys who have a grappling edge over him. But taking a look at this matchup, obviously favor Dober to be the more technical striker, just a lot more seasoned. But Alves, he's a very dynamic striker in that, he's way more explosive. I think he's the way heavier hitter. Dober has shown an insane chin, but he is getting clipped and hurt a lot. And at a certain point, it is going to catch up to you. And on top of that, for this matchup, Alves is a very slick submission grappler. He is someone who will go for the neck if you're hurt. So, again, someone like Dober who has shown good recoverability, I think the way to get him out of there is to jump on that submission instead of looking for the ground and pound finish, which I do think that Alves is super live for. So I think there's a good chance we could see Alves just land something big on Dober and then look for the submission, get him out of there. But, if Dober is able to survive that first round onslaught from Alves, I do like him to eventually take over come that second and third round. I think Dober's shown much better cardio. He's shown much better technical striking. And Alves, again, will slow down in fight. So if Alves kind of has a bit of a cardio dump in that first round, I could see Dober just start to take over and look to just piece up Alves going into that second and third round. So while I do think that for all those reasons, Dober should probably be a slight favorite, I don't think he should be this big of a favorite. I think that Alves does have a number of paths to victory here. And with the amount of damage that Dober's taken lately and how explosive Alves is, I'd be a little hesitant playing the Dober money line. In fact, I feel this is likely a dog or pass play here. But as far as the official pick, I think I'm actually going to side with Alves. I think he is going to land something big on Dober, and I think he's going to snatch up a submission, either a guillotine or like a rear naked choke or something. But with the way Alves fights, I think he just kind of invites a war. He likes to make it a very scrappy fight. So this is a fight I do generally like it to go under. I think either Alves gets the early finish or we see him get finished later in the fight as he starts to slow down. So official pick for this fight, I'm going to go with Alves by round 1 submission. And one last thing I wanted to add about this fight before I wrap it up is I feel like with someone like Alves, who is as dynamic as he is, as dangerous as he is on the feet and on the mat, you just can't really lay that much chalk against him. And I kind of made the mistake of doing so in his first fight against Demir, and I feel like I may have gotten away with one there because I don't know if you guys remember, but Alves, he actually did take a round off Demir Ismagulov, and interestingly, it was actually the third round that Alves had won, even though he had gotten the knockdown in the first round. So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is I feel that Ismagulov is actually a much more defensively sound fighter, a much more well-rounded fighter than Dober, and Alves still was able to knock him down and take the third round off of him. So I think that against someone like Dober, who, if he does get clipped, he won't have the outs that Ismagulov had in the takedowns. So I feel that if Dober, if he does get hurt, which I do think there's a good chance of him getting clipped here, I think that Alves would be able to define the submission. And, even if this fight, I guess, gets extended, I feel that seeing as how Alves actually won that last round against Ismagulov, and Ismagulov, in my opinion, is a more defensively sound fighter, a much more, conservative fighter than Dober. I feel that Alves could potentially even squeak away with a decision should it go there. So I think Alves is the side. I think he can get the early finish, and I think that if this fight somehow does make it to a decision, he could probably win a decision as well, just because I think he's got the wrestling or the grappling upside, in addition to his explosiveness and his dangerous submission game. So give me Alves here. Official pick, I'll go with Alves by round 1 submission. And in the next fight, we have Alex Morono versus Matthew Semelsberger. And Semelsberger's the minus 160 favorite. Morono's the plus 140 underdog. And a very intriguing fight, honestly. I think Morono's a very interesting test to see if guys are UFC caliber. I think Morono's just at a gatekeeper level, honestly. But I do think he's a pretty solid fighter, given all of his attributes. He's not the best athlete in there, but he does have pretty decent boxing, and he is someone who will get in your face and throw volume. He's got good cardio, but historically where he has struggled has been against guys who could take him down and control him. And while he has had a pretty extensive UFC career and is on a nice little win streak, I just don't really rate any of the guys he's beaten at the UFC level. I'd say his best win is probably Max Griffin, but I kind of put Max Griffin in the same category as Morono, as someone who is a pretty solid gatekeeper, pretty solid skill set, but just maybe not the best athlete in there. But overall, just a pretty solid, game to test guys who are coming up. However, his other wins, or Morono, that is, a lot of his other wins are guys who I just don't really rate. Guys like Mickey Gall, David Zawada, Donald Cerrone near the tail end of his career, Reese McKee, Zach Otto, Song Kanan. So all guys who are just either no longer with the promotion or guys who are probably on their way out. And on top of that, Morono does have a loss to Anthony Pettis, who's basically just PFL fodder at this point. That said, though, I do still think Morono's a decent fighter, and historically he has been pretty undervalued. And he's going up against Matthew Semelsberger, who does seem like a somewhat promising fighter. Definitely does have holes in his game, but with Semelsberger, he does have pretty sharp boxing. He's got a nice jab, a nice 1-2. He is someone who will throw with power, and coming into this fight, I do think he's going to be the better athlete. He's going to be the taller, longer guy, but some big concerns on the Semelsberger side is that, one, he is relatively unproven. His wins are arguably, I'd say, even worse than Morono's. AJ Fletcher, Martin Sano, Jason Witt, Carlton Minus, I'd say are all probably weaker guys than whatever Moreno's gone up against. And on top of that, Semelsberger has shown pretty poor takedown defense and pretty poor get-ups. And he is someone who will slow down as the fight progresses. He has shown that he will fight through the fatigue, and he will continue to fight, but he definitely does slow down, and his movement and his striking definitely does seem a lot more labored going later into the fight. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think in terms of just value, Morono is probably the side. He's the way more tested UFC level fighter. I think he's got better cardio and output, but I think Semelsberger is going to have the power here. I think that the knockout may be live on the Semelsberger end, but I do think that when it comes to them exchanging, we'll see Semelsberger maybe come out ahead, just landing the heavier shots. But I can also see Semelsberger maybe slowing down going into the second and third round, and we start to see Morono maybe pour it on and up the volume and win the second or the latter two rounds that way. Both guys, I think, have extremely spotty takedown defense and pretty poor get-ups, which I do think could actually be a factor in this fight. The issue is Morono's just not a very good or aggressive wrestler. He's only hit 4 takedowns in the UFC, 3 against Reese McKee, who no longer with the promotion, and McKee was, I think, only in the second fight after getting just completely beat up by Khamzat. But the only other takedown he's had was against Perez, which was from a slip. Perez, he was throwing some weird spinning attack and slipped, fell off balance, and Morono just got on top of him. But outside of that, Morono really hasn't shown much wrestling or grappling for that matter. And on the Semelsberger end, I think he might actually be the better wrestler, but it's from pretty limited footage. We have seen him go to the wrestling a bit, and I believe it was his late takedown against Fletcher that did win him the fight. Good awareness there from him, but I just don't know if he's going to be able to go to it this fight. I think that whoever mixes in the wrestling, I think will have a lot of success here. So, I think Morono's the value side, but at the end of the day, I think I will go with Semelsberger here. I think he's the younger fighter, and we have seen him actually kind of make some improvements fight to fight. Obviously with Semelsberger, the takedown defense and get-up still are pretty subpar, and I'd still say he struggles a bit in higher pace fights, but he hits harder. I think he's the better athlete. I think he's going to be able to edge some of the striking exchanges just because he'll be landing some of the bigger shots, and I think if there's anyone with some wrestling upside, or with more wrestling upside, I should say, it's probably Semelsberger also. So I'm going to go with Semelsberger here. I don't hate the shot on Morono, but I do think Semelsberger is the rightful favorite here. Probably not going to bet him unless I can get him at near a pick him or minus 120 or so. But the official pick is going to be Semelsberger by decision. And this is a fight that I do kind of favor to go the distance. Semelsberger, he has shown some power, and Morono, he has been chinned before, but that was against Chaos Williams. But outside of that, he has shown pretty good durability, and Morono, not a big finisher on his end either. And with Semelsberger, he has shown some pretty insane durability. So I do think this fight goes to a decision, and if it goes there, I kind of slightly edge Semelsberger just because he's gonna have the power, and I think he's got a little more wrestling upside also. So give me Semelsberger. Give me Semelsberger by decision. And in the next fight, we have Anthony Smith versus Magomed Ankalaev. Ankalaev's the minus 465 favorite. Smith is the plus 365 underdog, and a pretty interesting fight here. Ankalaev coming in as a big favorite, understandably so. A lot of people just really like how technical he is, and I get it too, right? The guy's just a very well-rounded fighter, very technical on the feet. He's got good footwork, good distance management, does a good job of fighting behind the jab. Decent output, but he is content to kind of just coast sometimes and play it safe. However, I do feel that Magomed has got decent power when he does decide to sit down on his shots. On top of that, he can wrestle. It's not his primary game plan, but we have seen him hit the wrestling on numerous occasions. And on the other side, we have Smith, who is a pretty solid veteran fighter, very well-rounded skill set also. A bit of a gatekeeper at this point, but still a very solid fighter. He's got good striking. He's got a very nasty low kick, and he's got a very slick submission game also. But the issue with Smith is that he does tend to fall apart against some of these higher level guys. And overall, I do find Smith to be a bit of a wild card in that he will come out and look great in certain fights. I'm looking at the Span fight, the Crute fight, the Clark fight. So he is someone who can come out hot and get a quick finish. But I have seen him pull off some come from behind wins also, most notably against Gustafsson and Oezdemir. But Smith, he is fully capable of just laying a complete egg also, right? We saw in the Teixeira fight, he just completely fell apart. He started strong first couple of rounds, but I just completely hit a wall and ended up getting an absolute beating thrown on him in the later rounds, and eventually got the late stoppage. And then there was the Rakic fight where Rakic was able to kind of just lay on top of him for 3 rounds. So we've seen just performances all over the place from Smith. So you do have to wonder which Anthony Smith is going to show up. Regardless, I do think that Ankalaev is going to be the side. I think he's just the more technical striker. I think he's got the wrestling in the back pocket also if he needs to. We've seen Smith taken down and controlled before, and against Ankalaev, I think that is definitely a path. But where this line is now, it is a little disrespectful. Smith, he is a very good fighter. He is someone who is, I'd say, pretty dangerous on the feet. He's got a pretty nasty low kick game, and if Ankalaev isn't careful, he could get caught in a submission, which he has done before, right? The guy's lost a last-second submission, and we do know Smith is someone who is capable of hitting these last-second submissions, these crazy come-from-behind wins, and Smith, he does have a pretty slick submission game, so I wouldn't completely count Smith out here, but I do think that Ankalaev is the rightful favorite here. However, where the line is at, I do find it a little disrespectful. I wouldn't hate a shot on Smith or even Smith inside the distance. This is a fight I do kind of like to go under just because Smith historically has been a bit of a killer-be-killed fighter. The only issue is Ankalaev is not exactly someone that will push a pace, and he's not someone that will actively look for or hunt the finish. I'd say Ankalaev is more of an opportunistic finisher. You look at some of his finishes, they're against, I'd say, pretty reckless guys and lower-level guys, too. Guys like Kudalaba twice, Lincoln Bula, Marcin Prachnio, and then a ton of finishers on the regionals. But we have seen that now that he's taken that step up in competition against guys like Krylov and Uzdemir and Santos, he is, I'd say, a lot more reserved in there. He's not pushing as much of a pace. He's not really overextending as much. So I can see this fight going to a decision, especially if Ankalaev just decides to play it safe in there. But we do know that Smith is someone who is aggressive, and he will go for it. So he will leave openings to get finished. But I wouldn't go too crazy on the under. I'll have to see what the line looks like. If it's a reasonable price, I'll probably take a stab at it. But definitely not a lock or anything, just because Ankalaev has shown proclivity to play it safe, especially against these high-level guys. But official pick for this fight, I'm going to go with Ankalaev. Ankalaev by decision. And just a last-second edit to this breakdown, because I have been looking into it a little bit more throughout the week. And a bit of a hot take here, but I actually feel that Smith might have the better hands in this matchup. And people are probably going to disagree with this, but I feel that if this goes 15 minutes standing, I think that it's going to be extremely competitive. I'd argue that Smith could even get the better of Ankalaev on the feet. So I do feel that for Ankalaev to win, he's probably going to have to go to the wrestling in this fight, which I think is a very clear path, and I think probably going to be his path of least resistance in this fight. So I think if he's doing that, he's most likely just going to end up winning a decision. I do think it's competitive on the feet, and I think what's going to be the difference maker here is the takedowns and the control time, which I think Ankalaev can pull off. So I think this kind of reinforces my initial take that Ankalaev wins by decision. So once again, official pick is Ankalaev, and Ankalaev by decision. And in the next fight, we have Alex Perez versus Alexandre Pantoja, and Pantoja is the minus 155 favorite. Perez is the plus 135 underdog, and this should be a pretty fun fight. Most of Pantoja's fights are very exciting, but we'll start with Perez first, who I'd say is a very solid, well-rounded fighter. I believe he is coming from a wrestling base, but I do think his boxing's quite serviceable. I think he's got some very nice heavy leg kicks as well. And Perez, he is a pretty reliable wrestler. He's got a somewhat dangerous submission game also. He's got a nice anaconda choke and arm triangle choke that he does like to attack. I wouldn't say he's super slick on the ground or anything, but he does have these strongman chokes that he could implement against maybe some of these lower-level guys. But he is going up against Pantoja, who is a black belt himself, so I don't know if he's going to be able to pull that off against him. But going back to Perez real quick, he is a bit of an enigmatic fighter in that I feel like there is a bit of uncertainty around this guy. And what I mean by that is, one, we might not even see him make it to fight day. He's pulled out on a number of occasions just due to either weight cut issues or just injuries. And two, he is coming off of a really long layoff. Not entirely his fault, but it is 2 years off, which is somewhat concerning. And Perez, he does have some pretty questionable performances. So what I mean by that, right? So the Benavidez fight, that was a weird fight, honestly, where Benavidez, he lands just a very weird takedown, and all of a sudden, Perez, we see him just turtling up, eating shots to the side of the head, and ends up getting finished twice, essentially, in that fight. And then, of course, he fights Fugitt in a fight where, the performance is a little more understandable. Fugitt is able to catch him with a very slick guillotine in transition, but that's two fights where he lost, where Perez kind of just slipped up in there. It is against two pretty solid fighters, so it is understandable, but at the same time, it is a little, I guess, concerning, right? And lastly, Perez, while he does look like a very solid fighter overall, very well-rounded, all of his wins have been over guys who are just no longer with the promotion. I'd say the Formiga and Torres wins are decent, but Formiga was at, I'd say, the tail end of his career, and is actually no longer with the promotion. Same with Torres. But you look at some of his other wins, guys like De La Rosa, guys like Jordan Espinosa, Eric Shelton. These guys just no longer with the promotion, all very, very low-level guys. And when he did take that step up in competition against guys like Benavidez and Figueiredo, he gets finished in the first round. Granted, that is a big jump in competition, right? Going from guys like Jordan Espinosa and Mark De La Rosa to guys like Benavidez and Figueiredo, but it is hard to kind of gauge where this guy really is at in terms of how he stands in the division, and coupled with the fact that he's coming off of a long layoff, he's had concerns, with the weight cut and stuff. It just leaves a lot of uncertainty on the Perez side. But I don't want to sell him short or anything here. He is, I think, a solid athlete. He's got good boxing, he's got good leg kicks, he's got good wrestling, and he's got good cardio as well. So I do think the guy's got a pretty solid, well-rounded skill set. I think that he's a good athlete, and overall, I do think he's a good fighter. Just not really sure, how he stands compared to the rest of the guys in the top 5, 6, 7 who have been more active lately. That said, it'll take us to his opponent, Pantoja, who honestly is just one of my favorite fighters to watch in the division. I really like these just Brazilian marauders, these guys who kind of like to just come forward, throw caution to the wind, throw heavy in there, and have a really strong jiu-jitsu game to back it up. Guys like Luque and even Oliveira, right? And he does have a very similar style to Luque in that Pantoja, he is a very pressure-heavy fighter. He's got power in his hands. He is a tad hittable at times, but he's got a fantastic chin, and if this fight does hit the ground, he is a very dangerous submission artist also. So you can see that, this guy is kind of like a mini Luque in there in a lot of regards. And similar to Luque, Pantoja, he is someone that, does slow down as the fight progresses, and he can get stuck on his back, right? Against good wrestlers, guys that have good submission defense, they could definitely take him down and control him. And Pantoja, he is someone who will give up submission to attack the submission, which, I don't really like. I know he is a very dangerous submission artist, but against guys who are a little more defensively sound in there, you'll just end up giving away a very good position. And against a solid wrestler like Perez, who is very strong and heavy on top, he could end up giving away the round if he isn't able to hunt that submission or find that submission. And like I was saying before, Pantoja, he does slow down in fights, especially with his style. He does throw heavy in there. He is very aggressive. So, most of his, I think, win equity is tied up in those earlier rounds. He has won decisions before, but they're not very pretty. And again, someone like Perez, who I think does have better cardio and better wrestling, I do think that if it goes to a decision, it likely does favor Perez. But regardless, I do think this should be a pretty fun, pretty exciting fight. Pantoja usually does bring it. I think it's somewhat high variance, this fight, in that I like the striking of Pantoja. I think he's the more dangerous striker. He's got more power in his hands. Perez, he's got some nice leg kicks, but I do favor the striking coming from Pantoja overall. Perez, I think, has got the wrestling advantage. I think he should be able to take Perez down, but he does have to be careful of the submissions coming from Pantoja. But this fight is a pretty interesting fight in that I think both guys can offer issues to the other stylistically. Pantoja historically has kind of struggled against wrestlers. We saw him lose against Ortiz and most recently against Askarov. Both guys have been able to really control him on the mat. And I think Perez could have a similar game plan But overall, I'm still not completely sold on the grappling of Perez. I think Pantoja is live to maybe catch him in something on the mat. And I think Pantoja could potentially just clip Perez on the feet also. So the official pick for this fight, I'm going to go with Pantoja by round 1 submission. I think a club and sub is potentially live here. I think that Perez could also just get caught in a transition or something. So I do like Pantoja to win in round 1, but I think Perez by decision is also maybe a value play, just because I do think that if Pantoja isn't able to get Perez out of there, we see Perez likely just kind of grind him out for the remaining 2 rounds. And historically, I'd say Pantoja has struggled against wrestlers and grapplers in a decision. So if this does go to decision, I do favor Perez, but official pick, I'm going to go with Pantoja by round 1 submission. And moving along, we have Derrick Lewis versus Sergei Pavlovich. And it looks like this fight is a pick-em on a number of sportsbooks. We do see Lewis as a slight favorite at minus 115 in some spots, minus 105 for Pavlovich. So very closely lined fight. I can't say I disagree with it too much, but we do have a very interesting matchup here. And with Lewis, it is pretty straightforward in terms of breakdowns for him. Maybe an oversimplification, but with Lewis, you can rely on just a few outcomes for him, right? He's going to be very low output. He's going to get backed up a lot, and generally he's going to be losing a fight until he wins, or it ends up just being a very low-paced staring contest, right? And I feel like that covers about 90-95% of the outcomes of his fights. And the fact is with Lewis, he's just someone that is generally looking to capitalize on openings. He's content to kind of take the back foot, let his opponents lead the dance, and just look for openings to land that big power shot of his, which, he's definitely one of the heavier hitters in the division, and he is capable of landing that knockout blow at any point in the fight. But the thing is with Lewis is he's just not a very good minute winner, and he's really not that good defensively either. He does have that equalizer in his hands, but the fact is he's a pretty one-dimensional guy with not a ton of minute-winning ability. On the other side of things, we have Pavlovich, who at one point was a somewhat hype prospect. He's coming off of another knockout win here, and if he is able to somehow get the knockout here, the hype train could very well be back on track. But with Pavlovich, the first thing you do have to say about him is the guy's got a pretty insane reach, even for a heavyweight. He's got a decent jab, which he fights behind. He's got a nasty overhand. I like how he digs to the body. He's shown power on a number of occasions, and he's shown really good killer instinct. The issue with Pavlovich is, of course, he's got a ton of round 1 knockouts, and outside of the Abdelwahab fight, he hasn't really beaten anyone of note, and even against Abdelwahab, he knocked out an older veteran, a slower guy. So while I do think it's impressive, it's not as impressive as if he'd have done it a few years ago, but at the end of the day, the concerns still are there in terms of his cardio, his defensive grappling, and how he's going to look in extended fights. But fortunately for him, I don't think Lewis is really going to offer too many problems in that regard, right? Lewis, he's not going to look to wrestle in there. And Lewis, he's not really going to look to push a pace either in there. So I think the question we really have to ask here is, how good is the chin of Pavlovich? Is he going to be able to take a punch from the Black Beast and survive? And honestly, I have no idea. We haven't really seen the chin of Pavlovich really tested. He did get TKO'd by Overeem, I think, in his debut, but that was more of like a ground and pound scenario as opposed to him, just completely getting flatlined. But on the feet in this matchup, I do think that Pavlovich will have the tools to succeed. It'll likely be a stand-up affair, and in that case, Pavlovich will have a pretty sizable reach and age advantage over Lewis. Historically, Lewis, I think, has kind of struggled against longer guys, and you're going to look at that record, and technically he's 4-1 against guys longer than him, but I do think you have to kind of contextualize it a little bit. So one of the fighters that he fought with the longer reach is Francis Ngannou. So obviously that fight ended up just being a bit of a staring contest, and Lewis ended up winning that fight. And then the Volkov fight, Volkov was actually piecing up Lewis for a good 14 minutes before getting caught at the end there. And then Oleinik technically does have a longer reach than Lewis, but Oleinik is a grappler, so that's not going to play too much of a factor in this fight. But Blades, he also has a longer reach than Lewis, and Blades was actually winning minutes on the feet against Lewis. He was touching him up with that jab, with the leg kick. And, if Lewis or if Blades, who is primarily a wrestler, is able to do that standing, I think Pavlovich, who is, primarily a striker, should have similar success. And then, of course, Cyril Gane had a longer reach than Lewis and was able to kind of just stifle him on the offensive end and just eventually get the finish. So while Lewis, he is technically 4-1 against guys longer than him, he struggled historically against these guys, or at least not put on his best performance. Of course, Lewis, he can just find the knockout here, but I do expect Pavlovich to likely be winning minutes on the feet. I think he's going to be using his length and his speed to just touch Lewis, stay on the outside, and kind of just stay safe. Obviously, this is going to be a pretty big step up in competition for Pavlovich. He does have one decent UFC win in Shamil Abdurakhimov, but again, that's against a much older Shamil who was actually coming off of a knockout prior to that also. So overall, I really haven't rated the wins of Pavlovich all that much, but he is a big physical heavyweight. He's a tall, lanky guy, or long guy, strong guy, and he is a solid striker. So I do think he's got the tools to win here, and I think he potentially could have the skills to do it also. I think that if he's fighting smart and or fighting conservatively, he could just kind of, I think, coast to a decision. I don't know if Lewis is going to look to force the issue here. Historically, he's not been very aggressive. Usually the only guys I think he really is aggressive against is guys who can probably kind of bully a bit, and maybe guys whose power he doesn't quite respect. We saw that in the Daukaus fight. He just started very aggressively against Daukaus, kind of just marched him down and just backed him up. And to a certain extent, Olenek and Latifi, two guys who, aren't much of a threat on the feet, guys who are a bit physically smaller than him. I think against those guys, Lewis is a little more aggressive, but usually against a lot of other guys, he's just going to be content to take the back foot and look to counter and look for openings. On top of that, Lewis is coming off of a pretty nasty knockout, so I think it could be a factor here, right? He could come in being a bit more defensive. He is fighting in front of his home crowd once again, so he's probably not going to want to get knocked out for the third time in a row in front of his own crowd. So I can definitely see this fight being just a bit more of a tepid affair. Maybe Pavlovich is going to go out there. He's going to respect the power of Lewis. Lewis, I think, is probably going to concede the back foot and maybe not take too many risks. So I can kind of see this fight just playing out a bit slower, being one of those fights where both guys are just going to be super conservative in there and not take too many risks. And at distance, I do favor Pavlovich because he is going to have a pretty decent size advantage. I think he's going to be able to stay safe behind those kicks, behind the jab. So if it plays out that way, I do favor Pavlovich to win a decision. And obviously, this is a heavyweight fight. So if at any point they decide to start swinging and trading, someone could go down. Lewis obviously has a ton of power in his hands, and he could easily get the knockout. But I do think Lewis can get knocked out. Also, Lewis, I think, historically has been pretty durable. He has a ton of TKO losses, but that's more so his opponents kind of swarming him and him shelling up and kind of just not fighting back anymore. But he is coming off of a very, very bad knockout loss against Tuivasa, where I think it was the first fight he was actually just completely out cold. He face-planted that fight, and coming off that sort of a knockout, I think it's a bit concerning, honestly. Like, from a mental standpoint, I think it's bad, obviously, and then you do have to wonder if that chin is going to eventually start to go. Lewis, he has been hurt before, and he is starting to get up there in age, and he is going up against Pavlovich, who is a very big hitter. But official pick for this fight, I am going to go with Pavlovich. I think if it goes to a decision, it favors him. I think that if they do start swinging in the pocket, I think he could get the knockout as well. Obviously, I think Lewis can also. So I think that might be a 50-50 affair. But again, Lewis is coming off of a knockout loss, and we haven't really seen the chin of Pavlovich tested either. So maybe I might actually favor Pavlovich in some of those exchanges. But overall, I do like the Pavlovich side here. The big concern really is the level of competition and him being extended past that first round. And lastly, I guess this fight also being in Dallas, Texas, does have me a little concerned also, because if this fight does go to a decision and it is a somewhat low-paced affair, they might just end up giving it to the hometown guy in Lewis, and Lewis has actually kind of weaseled his way to some of these decisions before, so it is a little concerning here, so I wouldn't go too hard on Pavlovich, but I do think Pavlovich is likely the side here. I think he has better minute winning ability, and I think he could get the knockout also. And ultimately, with Lewis, I'd say outside of just the knockout power, he doesn't pose too many other threats to really take advantage of some of the potential flaws of Pavlovich, like maybe the grappling defense, maybe the cardio, because again, like I said, Lewis, not really a wrestler, not really someone to push a pace. So official pick for this fight, Pavlovich by decision. And in the co-main event, we have Brandon Moreno versus Kai Kara France, and pretty refreshing matchup, even though technically it is a rematch. Honestly, just a little tired of Moreno versus Figgy, but this should be a pretty fun fight between two strikers. Just going over the odds real quick, because I think I might have skipped that, but Moreno is the minus 190 favorite. France is the plus 165 favorite. So we'll start with the underdog in Kai Kara France. With Kai, he is a pretty technical striker. He moves pretty well in there. He's got good footwork. I think he's pretty good defensively. He's got a nice defensive shell that he fights behind. He's got good head movement in the pocket. He's got decent power. However, I wouldn't really consider him much of a finisher. I know he's got a couple of knockout wins recently, but by and large, I feel he is more of a volume guy. He's someone who is pretty good at mixing in the kicks, but he is someone that is pretty good at churning out pretty consistent output. And he's going up against Moreno, who is a very well-rounded fighter in his own right. He's got pretty unorthodox movement on the feet, but he does make it work. He's got good combination punching. I like how he caps off a lot of his combinations with a kick, which, it's not something you see too much, right? A lot of people throwing naked leg kicks out there and not really setting much up, but, Moreno actually does a pretty good job of setting those all up. But as far as just other parts of his game, Moreno, he's got pretty solid wrestling as well. He's got good jiu-jitsu, to just a very well-rounded fighter. He does generally prefer to strike, but we have seen him mix in the wrestling occasionally. But I think what really sets Moreno apart really is the fact that he's got insane cardio and durability. The guy's been able to take some of Figgy's best shots. He took some of Pantoja's best shots also. And he did show really good scrambling ability, really good in transitions against Formiga, who's a very solid grappler as well. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think that I do have to favor Moreno here. Obviously, they fought the first time, and Moreno was able to get the better of Kai in that first fight. But, since then, he's been in a number of 5-round fights. I think he's actually been in there with slightly better competition also during that time span. And on top of that, Moreno's kind of just showed a more well-rounded skill set as opposed to Kai Kara France, who is primarily just a striker. He doesn't have a ton of wrestling upside. I don't know how good his grappling really is. Whereas with Moreno, we've seen him, go the distance all 5 rounds. We've seen him mix in the wrestling. We've seen him go to the grappling also. But outside of that, we do have to look at just how the first fight played out, where Kai Kara France actually had a pretty solid first round, but we saw Moreno just completely take over in the second and third. I think it came down to the pressure and the cardio of Moreno. He was able to continuously put on that sort of pressure and pace throughout the second and third round, whereas Kai looked like he started to maybe slow down a bit after that first round. Kai, I think, did a better job pressuring. He was blitzing into the pocket, but we did see the speed start to wane from him a bit, and once that happened, I think Moreno was able to get off much more effective offense going into the later rounds. And I can see that being a bit of an issue going into this fight as well, because Kai Kara France, he has given up quite a bit of size actually in this fight, and for his style to work, he has to, I think, maintain that sort of speed and cardio going later into the fight, because if he does slow down, it's going to be much harder for him to close the distance without taking damage, especially against a solid high-level striker like Moreno. But skill for skill, I think both guys are on a similar level. It's just that I think Kai Kara France has given up a lot of physical advantages. Like I was saying, he's given up size and reach in this fight, which I think is pretty crucial, because he's going to have to get inside on Moreno to do damage. And like I was saying before, I'd say past that first round and a half, he's going to slow down to the point where, he's not going to gas out or anything, but I do think that once he's on a similar level as Moreno in terms of just the quickness and the speed at which he's throwing his punches and combinations, we're going to see Moreno start to really close up and kind of pull ahead in terms of significant strikes landed, I'd say, in the latter half of the fight. probably even sooner. I'd say probably even as soon as like late second round, we're going to see Moreno really start to pull ahead potentially. And in addition to that, I think Moreno's the more durable fighter. Also, Kai Kara-France, he's pretty durable himself, but we have seen him hurt before. We have seen him dropped on a number of occasions. Moreno, obviously, he's taken some pretty heavy shots himself, but out of the two, I do favor Moreno to have the better chin and the toughness. And in a similar vein, I would say that Moreno's probably got better cardio also. Again, Kara-France doesn't have bad cardio by any means, but I do think that between the two, Moreno kind of edges it in terms of the cardio. And so you put all those things together, I feel you kind of have to favor Moreno, especially since for Kara-France to win here, he's going to have to outstrike Moreno, either knock him out, which I think is very unlikely, or outstrike him for 3 rounds, which I think is pretty unlikely also given, like I was saying before, the height and the reach advantage, the potential cardio and durability advantage for Moreno, and just the fact that Moreno, he's actually been in there with, far better not far better strikers, but, he's been in there with Fugitt, he's been in there with Pantoja, and he has gone 5 rounds on a number of occasions, whereas with Kara-France, he's never been in 5 rounders, so I think you got to edge it for Moreno in those spots. And the last thing I will say about this fight is that I feel that with Kara-France, he tends to thrive in fights that are a bit more technical, fights that are a little more clean, right? I think he tends to struggle in fights that get a little dirty when fighters are able to really, I think, fight aggressively against him and just not give him the pretty technical fight that he likes, right? I'm thinking his first fight with Moreno made it just a very scrappy affair and was able to beat Kara-France. And then we also saw in the Rafael fight where he did have Rafael hurt, but Rafael just pushes an insane pace and he makes it a dogfight in there, and he was able to eventually get Kara-France out there. So I think that Moreno has the advantage in that regards, where I think Moreno, he can fight technically, but I think Moreno can also do well in a dogfight, in a fight where they're exchanging in the pocket, in a fight where it's getting a little sloppy in there. Whereas with Kara-France, I think he does tend to fall apart a bit in those types of fights. So I like Moreno in the spot. I do like him to get it done by decision, if not maybe a late finish. I don't think that Kara-France is necessarily going to fall apart, but he has been pretty untested later in fights. But I do lean this fight to likely go the distance. Both guys, I think, are extremely durable. Definitely Moreno for sure. Kara-France has shown pretty good durability. I also don't think either guy has phenomenal punching power either. So if a finish does happen, it's likely going to be an attritional finish, I think, or Moreno maybe catching Kara-France in a submission or something. But by and large, I do expect this fight to go over because it is a flyweight fight at the end of the day. So, and if this fight does go the distance, I do favor Moreno to win it there. So official pick, I'm going to go with Moreno by decision. And in the main event, we have Amanda Nunes versus Julianna Pena. And Nunes is the minus 275 favorite. Pena is the plus 235 underdog. So obviously we have a rematch between the two with Pena pulling off the big upset in their first fight. That said, I feel that my take on both fighters has largely remained the same. However, I do have a slightly stronger lean in terms of how the fight's going to play out, which I'll get right into. So obviously in the first fight, Pena pulled off that massive upset, showed a ton of toughness and grit, but for as impressive as it was on her end, I'd say it was equally, if not more embarrassing of a performance on Nunes' end, right? Because, she came in, she started aggressive and just completely hit a wall after that first, 5-6 minutes and completely just fell apart. So just a very embarrassing performance, in my opinion, especially coming from someone who a lot of people would consider the greatest of all time. That said, I do think that there are a number of other factors that may have kind of played into it. Cardio was never really Nunes' strong suit, but that was an all-time gas job from her. So I think some of the other factors that may have contributed, and this is just complete speculation here, but she did have a COVID supposedly, I think just a couple months before this fight. So there's a chance she may not have fully recovered during that time. And, if it was affecting her during her camp as well, she probably wasn't able to get as much work in. And then, of course, she was cutting down to 135 for the first time in, I think, like 2 years. And all of her fights in between were at 145, where she didn't have to cut a ton of weight. So I think those are two big factors that may have contributed to her cardio just completely falling off the cliff after that first round. And I think there's some other reasons also, right? I think Nunes came in there just completely overlooking Peña. She probably didn't have a ton of respect for Peña's game. She wasn't really holding back with, her grappling at all. She was going hard with her striking. So all those reasons, you put them together and you get just a terrible gas job from Nunes. But overall, skill for skill, I do favor Nunes to be the much better fighter. She's the better athlete also. She's been in there with better competition. And so I'm of the opinion that Peña was able to catch Nunes, obviously far less than 100%. She got a Nunes who I think might have been compromised going into that fight. Of course, you do have to give Peña credit, but you just can't factor in Nunes completely gassing out after that 5-minute mark, right? Especially since we have actually seen her go, 3 rounds and 5 rounds before. So, I don't think that was, I don't think this is something that is likely to happen again, basically. But like I was saying before, my opinion on both fighters haven't really changed. I think Nunes is the better striker. She hits harder. She's the better wrestler. As far as the grappling, it could get interesting. I think both are black belts, but Peña's, I think, gone to it a lot more, and it's kind of what Peña is known for, whereas with Nunes, she's got just a way more well-rounded game. But I do think it's very competitive there. I wouldn't give anyone a massive edge in terms of just pure grappling, but in terms of just overall MMA game, I got to favor Nunes by a pretty significant margin. And assuming Nunes comes in with decent conditioning, I think she should be able to win this fight somewhat comfortably. I think the main thing is she should be able to largely control where the fight goes. She's the better striker. She's the better wrestler. She's got better takedown defense. So I think that if she wants to keep it standing, she could. If she wants to take Peña down, she could. I think it really just comes down to if Nunes is going to gas again, which, after that first performance, I really don't think so. I think she's gotten enough time off where she should have, I think, largely recovered from the effects of COVID. I think that she'd probably lower her walk around weight, not have to cut as much going down to 135. So, going into this fight, I feel her conditioning should be pretty on point. I don't think it'll be anything spectacular, but I think that she's not going to gas out after the first round is all I'll say here. But as far as how I think the fight's going to play out, obviously with Nunes, you could get a number of outcomes, right? It'll really just depend on how aggressive she wants to be. But seeing how the first fight played out, I think we see Nunes take it a little slower this fight, take a little more measured approach. I think that she's going to be the better striker, and I feel that if she's a little patient in there and she picks her shots a bit better, she'll still be getting the better of Peña on the feet. I think she'll be landing the bigger, heavier shots, and I think that if she's ever in trouble, she could just hit takedowns, get top control time, and kind of just grind out rounds. Peña, she is a somewhat dangerous guard player, but I think Nunes is good enough defensively on top, and she's got good enough jiu-jitsu to stay safe. But my take on the fight is that I do actually kind of like the over 2.5, and I kind of like Nunes by decision also. Obviously Nunes does have the power to get Peña out of there, but we did see Peña eat some pretty big shots from Nunes in their first fight, was able to gut it out. And the thing with Nunes is she is perfectly capable of kind of drawing a fight out, taking it a bit slower, and going the distance. I think a couple fights to look at really is the Shevchenko 1 and 2 performances. So in the first fight, I believe Nunes, she started those first 2 rounds, pretty aggressively, and then we saw her tire out in that third round and dropped that last round to Shevchenko, and then we saw her in the second fight in a 5-rounder take it much slower. It was a much different fight from her first fight. Nunes fought way more conservatively, maybe too conservatively. Some people would argue she lost that fight because not too much happened, but we did see an adjustment in the game plan. We saw a much slower pace from Nunes in a fight where maybe she respected her opponent a little more. She was a little hesitant because of the fact that she slowed down in that first fight. And I think that could be something similar, or at least she might have a similar mindset in this fight. We saw Peña take her best shots. So, Peña's probably confident she can eat some of Nunes' shots. And Nunes, knowing that Peña can eat her shots, probably isn't going to completely sell out for the knockout early. Pena is, pretty solid on the mat as well, so I don't see Nunes just kind of blowing through her on the mat either. So I have a pretty strong feeling that Nunes is going to take this a bit slower. And we did see also in the GDR fight for Nunes, she's capable of just hitting takedowns and getting top control time over the course of 5 rounds. And Peña's actually a bit of a back player herself, so she's not someone that's going to aggressively work her way back up if she gets taken down. So I think that's a pretty clear path for Nunes in terms of just the takedowns and top control time. But I do think Nunes can win pretty comfortably on the feet. So for this fight, I do still favor Nunes pretty heavily. Obviously, if her cardio issues haven't been sorted out, it's going to be a rough night for her. But I think that, going into the second fight, Nunes is really going to look to shore up her conditioning and just fight a much slower pace fight. So I'm going to go with Nunes here. I'm going to go with Nunes by decision. I think she just plays it a bit safer here, strike at distance a bit and then look to just control the fight on the ground when she wants to and stay safe from the submission. So official pick for this fight, Nunes by decision. And that'll do it for the breakdowns, which will bring us right into the recap for the previous event, UFC London, Blades versus Aspinall. The picks were all right. The card itself definitely seemed to underperform a bit. Definitely wasn't able to live up to the hype. I mean, it would have been hard for it to live up to the expectations after the first fight, but I do think that overall, even as far as a fight night card went, it did underdeliver here. Regardless, there were still some pretty fun fights, especially going into the main card. Really unfortunate main event, obviously, 2 weeks in a row. We had a very fun fight get taken away from us due to an injury, but hoping both guys make a pretty quick recovery and hoping the streak ends with that card there. But as far as the bets and the picks go, did end up having a pretty much near break-even night, went down 0.3 units. Not too upset, all things considered. There was one fight I went a little heavy on, which I'll get into in just a second here. But kicking off the card, we had Claudio Silva, Nicolas Dalby. I think I only had a small poke on Silva by submission here, just because I felt that was his path to victory. And he was able to get the fight to the ground in the first and early in the second. I think he could have had opportunities, but of course the guy does have some liabilities in terms of the cardio, which is why I didn't go too hard. And he did seem to fall off quite a bit there, so kind of glad I didn't go too hard there. Anyways, we move right along to Mandy Bohm, Victoria Leonardo. Yeah, this was just a very low-level fight that I didn't really want too much action on, but I did end up parlaying the over in this fight. Just felt that both fighters, not particularly dangerous, not particularly hard hitters, both seemed to be pretty durable. I know Leonardo got finished a few times, but those were against good competition, and one was from an injury, which I doubt would have happened here. But a pretty sloppy fight, honestly. Not going to be too interested in betting either fighter going forward. Definitely looking to maybe fade them, if anything. But moving along, Jai Herbert versus Cal Nelson. So I had the under parlayed in this fight. I thought that somebody was likely going to go down, and I guess one thing you just can't really factor in is the fighter's, mentality and game plan. Because it did seem like Herbert might have been a little shook from getting knocked out as brutally as he did in his last fight, and so he probably took a more safe approach and kind of was content to win a pretty safe decision here instead of going for it, which I felt that going into that, or later in that second round and going into that third round, he had Nelson. I thought Nelson was slowing down, and I felt that Herbert could have really started to pour it on Nelson, but I think he just wanted to secure the W, and can't really hate him for that, but it did kind of screw up the parlay there. But moving along, Muhammad Mokaev, Charles Johnson. I did end up putting a small half-unit shot on Johnson, and I also took the over in this fight. So yeah, I thought that the takedown defense of Johnson and get-ups, they look solid. Obviously, it just came down to, I think, the physicality. He just wasn't able to really get off the cage against Mokaev, and I like the over also just because Mokaev, this is a pretty decent step up in competition for him. I didn't think he was going to be able to just ragdoll Johnson in there like he did with some of his previous opponents. And I honestly thought Johnson did a good job defending and working his way back up, but just a big physicality difference. He just wasn't able to do much outside of maybe deny the takedowns. And I think this was a good wake-up call for Mokaev and his camp, and I guess his supporters also. I do still think that he's very young and needs a lot of polishing up because this wall install strategy isn't going to work against higher level guys, guys who are probably going to be able to match his physicality and get back to space. I think he's going to have to work on that a bit more if he wants to climb the rankings. But moving along, Makwan Imrikani, Jonathan Pierce. Initially, I had Makwan to win by submission, and then I also took a small poke on Makwan to win in round 1, because that's usually his win condition, but I still ended up playing his money line anyways, just because I thought something weird could potentially happen, right? Like Makwan throwing a flying knee or something, or it ended up being just a very scrambly sort of fight where maybe he wins like just a very close decision or something, which obviously was a bad read. Makwan typically only wins in the first round, but he's won a couple decisions before, regardless, or he has gone to a few decisions before, very close decisions. But regardless, it was not a good read, and I thought Jonathan Pierce, I think, fought pretty smart, honestly. He didn't really start attempting takedowns until after that first round when Amirkhani had gassed himself looking for that submission. So I think he fought pretty smart in there, stayed safe early, and then started to pour it on later. So good on Pierce there. Moving along, Nathaniel Wood, Charles Rosa didn't end up really having any action on this fight just because the money line was getting pretty out of hand, and I wasn't sure if it was going to add a ton of value in a parlay or anything. Did take a small poke by Rosa by submission, which I feel like would have been his most likely path to victory there, but obviously never really even came close. Would have just won that very comfortably. I don't think Rosa's long for the UFC. I think he's probably going to get cut after this fight. The guy's just no good, in my opinion. But moving along, Mark Diakese, Damir Hadzovic. Had Diakese anchoring a couple parlays, and honestly, he got it done very easily there. I'll be honest, though, I was a little concerned going into this fight that Diakese wouldn't fight the game plan that I thought he would. Diakese has had a habit of, I guess, sometimes fighting suboptimally and not wrestling when he should, but he fought smart this fight, went in there and just made easy work of Hadzovic, just played it super safe, and glad he did cash that leg of the parlay relatively easily. And moving along, Mason Jones, Ludovic Klein. So this was the big play I really whiffed on, and I'm not going to make excuses or anything. This was a pretty bad bet. Really shouldn't have gone as hard as I did on the money line here. I did kind of have the intention of possibly hedging out because I did feel the line was going to get wider, but after listening to some interviews and stuff and hearing about how Jones, he did supposedly have a full training camp, just didn't have a partner lined up or didn't have an opponent lined up just yet until a pullout happened, I guess made me a little more confident in his ability to come in here and get the W. But just a very, I think, poor game plan for Jones coming into this fight. And honestly, credit to Klein. He looked the best he's ever looked at the UFC level, I think, outside of that head kick against Young. But I'd say as far as just 3-round performances go, I think this was probably his best performance. He looked sharp in there. His cardio looked fine, which I think was a little surprising. I mean, he just looked like a completely different fighter in this fight compared to his fights against Trezano and Landwehr and Smith. And I'd argue that Jones was pushing a much harder pace than these guys, and he was able to keep up. Jones, I thought, fought pretty suboptimally also. I thought he'd look to go to the wrestling and grappling far earlier and far more aggressively. He did have a pretty boneheaded move in trying to, I think, jump guillotine or pull guard early in that third round. Not that it really mattered because he was down 2 rounds anyways, but doing that essentially gave the round away. I guess maybe he was going for a Hail Mary or something because it didn't look like he was on his way to winning that fight. So pretty bad read here, honestly. I just thought it would have been a very good stylistic matchup for him, and I think he underdelivered. But I think the biggest mistake here was just going as hard as I did, and I also played the Jones to win in round 2 and round 3, and submission lines also, so lost a ton of money on this fight, and really had to rely on the rest of the card to make it all back up, which fortunately did happen, right? So moving along, Volkan Oezdemir, Paul Craig, and this was a fight that I feel like I kind of read to a T here. Glad I went a little harder on it too. I did add on an extra 3 units just because I felt that Craig's path to victory here really was in the submission, hitting that armbar from guard or triangle or something. And overall, I just felt that it wasn't a very sustainable path to victory. And I just think that Oezdemir would have drilled the defense and just looked to fight smart in this fight. And I did actually pick him to win by decision. I thought that anytime Craig would flop to his back, he'd look to disengage and try to get that fight back up to the feet, which was exactly what he did. So really happy there. Kind of bummed I didn't take the decision line, which I think was a good plus number for him, but I already went pretty heavy on his money line already and didn't want to, I guess, be overexposed. Just wanted to cover the potential knockout also, because I do think the knockout is potentially live, right? If he had, clipped Craig, put him down, and then just, drop some hammer fist and put him out that way, it could have been a quick wrap. So ended up just playing the money line instead. Regardless, it did still work out. But moving along, Molly McCann, Hannah Goldie. So obviously I was on the McCann side, and I did end up having her parlayed. And what I did was I also parlayed the over in this fight separately in a different parlay with the over in the Leonardo fight. And basically my thought process here was I really don't think she's going to land another spinning elbow. I did say in the last breakdown of her fight against Carolina that it's a very low percentage move. I doubt that she hits it again. And of course, she comes out hot and basically puts Goldie out with similar spinning elbow. I think it had her rocked, but it was the follow-up shots that put her out. Anyways, I was a little weary of it, which is why I just played the money line and then put a little bit on the over. I didn't think it would happen again, but, who knows, man. Going into this fight, London crowd, McCann is someone who is a bit of a crowd favorite, someone who will play off the crowd and fight aggressively. So I just parlayed both separately instead of looking to play McCann by decision or something. So it still kind of ended up working out there. But that said, I don't think it happens a third time in a row, right? Especially not against Antonina, who I believe she did call out afterwards, which I do think is actually going to be a pretty fun fight. But moving along, Nikita Krylov, Alexandre Gustafsson. So, yeah, I was initially on the Krylov side. I did like him to win inside the distance, but ended up not playing it because I believe the number, I think on a lot of books was like just plus 100 or something. So, didn't see a ton of value in it. So, I ended up just passing. And, rough look for Gustafsson. 2 years off, comes in and basically gets knocked down like 3 times. I think Gustafsson's chin is pretty cooked at this point. I don't know if he's going to be winning too many fights unless it's against some very, very low-level guys. But even then, it's going to be rough because I think his chin is just completely gone. And even against low-level guys, if something gets through, it could put him out. But moving along, Paddy Pimblett, Jordan Levitt. And I did have Pimblett parlayed as well. Took the over in this, or took the fight goes in this fight. It was a very juicy number at plus 220, which I thought was a ton of value, but also was a little weary of it because it did seem like tremendous value. And when that's the case, it usually means maybe the bookies know something that I don't. And so I kind of tried to break it down a little further. I knew Paddy, he's got some power in his hands, but outside of the Vendramini knockout, he hasn't really shown a lot of, knockout upside. And despite what people think about Levitt striking, he does keep a high guard in there, and he does seem to be pretty averse to the striking exchanges. So I don't think the knockout was really live. I don't really think the finish was really live on the Levitt side, aside from like a freak submission or something. So I felt that the only way this fight finishes is likely Pimblett by submission, maybe by knockout, I guess if he catches him clean, but I felt the submission was pretty live, and I thought that Levitt would have good enough submission defense to maybe survive to a decision. Obviously, he did get his arm trapped in that body triangle, which led to a really quick submission. But I felt that if that didn't happen, Paddy's most likely path to a finish would be through, tiring Levitt out, because Levitt does slow down, I think, and I do think Paddy's probably got the better cardio. So it'd likely have been an attritional submission or an attritional finish in the third round if Levitt slows down enough, but obviously, he never got there. He was able to snatch up that submission against Levitt in that second round, but that's kind of why I took the Paddy to win in round 3 to, cover some of the liability there. But neither ended up cashing. Did cash the Pimblett money line though in a parlay. Still ended up coming ahead there, but overall it was a pretty fun fight. Levitt, pretty good sport, and honestly, don't mind Paddy as a fighter. He's someone that does bring it and generally is in pretty fun fights. So I don't get the hate there. I guess the guy's personality is maybe a little grating for some, but I do like watching him fight. But moving along, Jack Hermanson, Chris Curtis. Initially, I only had a couple units on Hermanson, but seeing as how I was adding units on to some of the other fights, and this was actually one of my more confident fights, I decided to add a few more units onto Hermanson as well, even though the line had lost a bit of value. I still thought that Hermanson should be the favorite here, maybe a slight to moderate favorite. Anyways, I was a little surprised with how good he looked on the feet there. I thought he'd be able to keep it competitive and then be able to mix in the wrestling and the grappling and maybe a bit of cage pushing to win rounds that way. But he thoroughly outstruck Curtis the first 2 rounds. The third round was a little closer, but honestly, I had Hermansson winning that round also. And in hindsight, I guess it shouldn't really have been all that surprising, I guess, because you look at some of the strikers that, or not the strikers, but some of the fighters that Curtis has beaten at the UFC level. We have Phil Haas, who was actually lighting Curtis up before he got bopped. And we all know Phil Haas has got a very questionable chin. But Haas, he was doing some damage to Curtis early. And then against Brendan Allen, a very flat-footed, very defensively void striker as well. Curtis was able to do work against him. But let's not forget, Brendan Allen was also landing on Curtis. And then it was against Vieira, who, again, is a grappler who has a very basic striking game, and even he was able to take a round off Curtis. And now Curtis is going up against a very tall, rangy striker in Hermansson, who does have the length and the size advantage, which he used really effectively, using the kicks, right, to keep Curtis at distance while also keeping the volume up. And on top of that, he showed really good lateral movement, which none of the other fighters that Curtis went up against did, right? He really made Curtis kind of chase him around the cage. Curtis didn't do a great job cutting off the cage, honestly. Very similar to Strickland and kind of just following opponents around the cage. But the main difference between the two is just that I think Strickland's a much bigger guy and is much more content to throw volume also, whereas Chris, he's a bit more of a counterpuncher. But really solid performance by Hermansson. Definitely exceeded some expectations there. I expected him to have maybe a little more wrestling, grappling success, but still was able to put on a solid 3-round performance, all things considered. But lastly, we had Curtis Blades, Tom Aspinall. Ended up taking the under in this fight, or had it parlayed. Not that it mattered. The other leg fell apart, but really not too much to say here. Just another anticlimactic end to another afternoon card here, which is honestly pretty disappointing. A big bummer, right? Because this fight actually looked like it'd be a bit of a banger, because I think, for the first 10, 15 seconds that this fight was happening, it looked like both guys were getting after it. There really wasn't much of a feeling out process for as long as it lasted, so really bummed out that it ended up happening the way it did, but really hoping Aspinall makes a quick recovery here, because I do think he's a very exciting fighter. And this heavyweight division is kind of devoid of talent. And honestly, having someone like Aspinall around, I think definitely livens it up a bit. So hoping he makes a quick and speedy and full recovery so he can come back and beat some guys up. So that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. And again, I do appreciate everyone who's made it this far already. I know a lot of people tune out after the breakdowns, but shout out to anyone who's still here till the end. But anyways, let me know what you guys think about some of these breakdowns, who you guys got, and best of luck with your guys' bets. But I'll catch you guys next week for Santos versus Hill.